Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 74.
Congratulations, you showed up. Give yourself a high five in celebration of your success. Welcome to the Cashflow Diary, where new and experienced investors come to take confident action towards their goals. Your host is a family man, a real estate entrepreneur, investor, coach, and instructor. As a master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow 101 game, he's inspired many to begin their journey into creating cash flow for themselves and their family. And now, here he is to offer you the tools required to earn the income desired. Your cash flow coach, Jay Massey.
All right, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I am your host, Jay Massey, and I'm excited that you are listening to us on this wonderful Memorial Day. Why do I say that? Because that means you are at least free enough to listen to us no matter where you are in the world. You're free enough to be able to own all kinds of devices that allow you to listen to us. And most importantly, you are free enough to make your own choices and invest your time in such a way, and you have chosen to do so with us. And I am very, very excited to do so. Today's guest definitely has been described as one of, if not the freest man in the world, and I definitely want to introduce him to you. But before we get there, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I want to let you know about two very important things. Sometimes you're coming to us because you're looking for that way to be able to begin your development of your own cash flow. You're like, man, I've got a lot of knowledge. I'm looking for knowledge. And I've got some time. But what I would like to do is to leverage that, time and be able to use it to create cash flow. Well, here's what I want you to do. You go over to learninvestingnow.com. That's learninvestingnow.com. And we have a course sitting right there for you so that you have the ability to do that. Others of you are saying, you know what, I don't have time. I know a little bit, but I would love to be able to leverage someone else's systems that could help me still build cash flow. And you have the opportunity to go build cash flow with Cashflow Diary at begininvestingnow.com. Either way you go, we got you covered. So I'm looking forward to talking to all you guys. By going over to the website, you'll get your course, your ebooks, and you'll be able to get started with us. Now, with that being the case, let's talk about just the idea, the concepts of all of the things that, many countries stand for, fight for, die for. And that's what I'm excited about today. Today, we've got an incredible individual who I've had the pleasure of meeting here recently. And I'm just so excited because you never know what incredible things will happen when you meet and are introduced to the right people. Oftentimes, we neglect the power of our network, but that becomes the absolute thing that we need to focus on the most. Today's guest is Simon Black. You may have heard of him a little bit. And just in case you haven't, he's an international entrepreneur, investor, founder of sovereignman.com, the most popular international diversification and asset protection website in the world. He has traveled to well over 100 countries. He may be one of the few people that has been more places than me and invest regularly in startup companies as well as productive real estate. I love the idea of the productive real estate that he talks about. Simon recently launched a hybrid fund raising, hear this, $35 million to invest in agricultural property in Chile. So I know that we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm hoping you are ready to make sure that you can take some copious notes so that we can figure out everything this man has to share with us. Simon, are you there?
I sure am. Well, that's a very humbling introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, I remember when we first met, I was just very awed by the amount of research and understanding that you had around the concepts of freedom and how it ties into real estate and all of these things. I was just like, wow. I was just, I remember what my first response was like, okay, everything this man is saying is exactly why I need more real estate. And that's what it was. You opened my mind to a whole new type of real estate when we talk about productive real estate. But before we go too far, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being the number one endorser of the book. For those of you, if you haven't gotten the copy, when you flip the book over, you'll see at the top, the very first person is Simon Black himself. It definitely means a lot that you took the time to read it and to write, what the nice words you had to say. So thanks.
Oh, it was a real pleasure. It hardly took me any time at all to read it. Honestly, it was I thought it was so well written, and what a great story. It was easy to get through and just so full of fantastic information. I was just so pleased that you sent me a copy. So happy to be part of it.
Awesome. Thank you. And now let's get down to it. Typically, what happens is that I always have the same first question for most of our guests. And I think you'll understand. I tend to view today's entrepreneurs like yesterday's comic book superheroes. And, we had the Batman, Spider Man. I know pretty soon some of you have probably already watched X-Men. And we put these guys and gals on a pedestal. They're able to solve all of our problems. And I think that's what, today's entrepreneurs are. However, every superhero has an origin story. Before Wonder Woman was Wonder Woman, she had a whole story. Before the Incredible Hulk, was the Incredible Hulk, he became that way for a reason. And I would love to know, before you were Simon Black, what on earth, created you or prompted you to want to attempt to be what some have called the freest man in the world and a permanent traveler. I just gotta know.
Well, that's that's a bit of a long story, and for some, maybe a bit controversial, actually, to hear.
Okay.
I'll give you the brief version, and that's I was in the military for some time, and
Thank you.
I've had the opportunity to participate in in some of the let's say some of the more recent goings on. So this would have been back in 2003, 2004, and was to be candid, fairly disillusioned with what was going on. I think at a national level, with some of the decision making that was being made, and for me, that sort of led to an entirely new way of thinking. I began to sort of question a lot of what I was being told, and that I'd spent most of my career overseas and had actually early on, I was only 20, 21, 22 years old, I guess, at the time, and was able to actually build up on the side a fairly substantial real estate portfolio that was bringing in a lot of cash flow on the side. So by the time I got out of the military, my brain was filled with a lot of new ideas, things that were honestly a little bit almost uncomfortable because they had defied everything that I had grown up to believe, and I felt like I just needed to leave for a little while and just think about things in a different way, and I started traveling, and I went from one country to another, and along the way, I realized that I enjoyed it so much, I just kept doing it, and everywhere I went, all over Latin America, Asia, Europe, Africa, everywhere I went, I would meet people, I would come across interesting businesses, interesting real estate opportunities, and from my own personal business background, because I sort of got my start in real estate, essentially getting into sort of some classic no money down deals before the market really took off in 2002, and having a lot of very solid cash flow. That's kind of how I viewed, that was my investment lens with which I viewed the world. And so everywhere I went, I would always look at real estate and different real estate opportunities, and just sort of kept that up for a very long time. And there was a certain point where I realized I really actually like being overseas, and there's some just phenomenal opportunities abroad. And 10 years later, I find myself here in Chile, at the helm of a new company that's out there investing in productive agricultural property, and I think one of the most exciting agricultural markets in the world.
Nice. Now, you bring up the topic of productive agricultural property. I know for many of you listening, you hear me when I say, you want your properties to produce something. We're normally talking about, cash flow. But when you say productive real estate, you mean something completely different. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Sure. When I say productive real estate, I mean producing farms. So something where I can plant something in the ground and it grows. There are a lot of different types for that, honestly, and real estate, farming real estate is definitely I think, a very unique and up and coming asset class. It's something obviously that's been around for thousands and thousands of years.
You mean it's not a new idea?
This is not, this isn't exactly a cutting edge idea. But over time, it's one of those things that farming in general has become very uncool, right? You don't see, there's not a whole lot of 16-year-old kids out there that say, I want to be a farmer when I grow up. These days it seems like, people want to be stockbrokers and things like that because that's where they think all the money is. And it's led to some very interesting trends. In most countries, the United States, Canada, most of Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, the average age of a farmer in these countries is well into their 60s, in some cases even late 60s, early 70s. I mean, everybody's a pensioner, and obviously don't really have a whole lot of, don't have the vast majority of their career in front of them anymore. And so what does this mean? It means that as farmers get older and older and older, really run the risk of them getting out of the business, of selling out, and not really have anybody to pass that on to, because it's just not an industry that people want to be in anymore. And yet this, real estate at the end of the day is all about supply and demand. It's like anything else, really. And if you buy sharply in a place where demand is increasing and supply is relatively constrained, then you can do incredibly well for yourself. And agricultural real estate is no different. I just look at the entire fundamentals of food in general, and I see those same constraints. Supply is in many cases actually flat or falling, particularly if you look at the amount of arable land per capita in the world. Productive farmland per capita in the world is actually flat or falling, and yet demand is increasing. And so you've got rising demand and sort of flat or decreasing supply. So this, as an investor and an entrepreneur, this is exactly the sort of problem that I want to tackle, and spend a lot of my productive time going after. And that's one of the things that we're doing here in Chile.
Excellent. Now, for those of you listening, I hope you caught some of the things is that he was looking for problems. And now what's interesting is that you had a world perspective of many problems because you did so much traveling, which obviously affects what we call your investor identity, what you are most likely to invest in, what you most likely know the most about, those things that allow you the greatest advantage when it comes to actually deploying capital and assets into the real estate world. And you chose food of all things to be able to produce with your real estate. Now, I'm just kind of curious, is there a particular food you like more than the other since you've studied, or where the food market is going?
Sure. There are a lot of interesting things about food. People, when they think about farmland, the thing that comes to mind probably for most people would be corn or wheat or something like that, grains in general, particularly if you're in the United States. This is the thing that most people are probably accustomed to. And these are generally monopolized by huge companies that have thousands, tens of thousands of acres and so forth. That's not really an environment that I want to get after and compete in, for a number of different reasons. One is because the margins are a lot lower for these kinds of seasonal crops, and that's one of the important things to look at. Seasonal crops are things that you plant in the ground, and in one season you grow, you harvest, and the next year you have to go back and plant something else again. So every season, basically every growing season, you have to plant the same thing over and over again. Those are things you can grow in a lot of different places. I mean, they're able to grow corn now in South Dakota, even parts of North Dakota. And what I'm really looking at, and the reason I've selected Chile, is because it has such a great combination of fantastic sort of Mediterranean climate. I mean, it never gets too hot, it never gets too cold. It's sunny practically all the time. There's a very predictable rainfall for the most part, and a lot of abundant water resources, very rich, nutrient-rich soil. And so that's a competitive advantage because there are very few places on the planet where you have that. So I've identified this place. It's similar to where you're at, Jay, in California, for example. There's very similar circumstances where you've got great climate and great soil and so forth. And you put that together, and you can do a lot more. It seems almost a waste to put that into production with something that's a seasonal crop. And so we move further up the value chain and do things that are higher value crops, like fruit trees, blueberry bushes, these sorts of things. So these are the sorts of things where you have to invest. You plant something in the ground, and sometimes you have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years But in that period, you almost start recouping practically your entire initial investment very early on, particularly with some high value fruits like cherry trees and things like that. That can be they can actually be incredibly lucrative in within the first couple of years.
Now, I'm assuming in that case, well, first of all, we don't have the water we need, but that's a whole nother story, especially in California. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. That's the problem these days in California.
so we're close, but we're not quite there. We're missing one major ingredient. The when you say higher value chain, now this is a new concept to me. I never really thought about there would be some foods that are just, you're saying some can be produced more in quantity, but those quantity foods tend to be more of a commodity, i.e., have thinner margins. But you're saying that there are other foods that if you're willing to wait, you actually have a higher profit margin on them because they're more difficult, or they're just.
Exactly. Exactly. So, for example, maybe somebody's making, on if they plant their entire farm, they might make $100,000 with corn, right? And
Okay.
so they plant corn, they make $100,000 on their farm, and they make corn in year one, and year two, and year three, and year four. Somebody else has the exact same amount of land, and he plants blueberries, as an example. Well, first year he doesn't make anything, and the second year he doesn't make anything, and the third year maybe makes a little tiny bit, but suddenly the fourth year he's making $500,000, right? And so by year four, he's completely recouped everything that he could have made planting corn, and then some. And then, of course, the next year he's doubled it, and the next year he's again and again and again. And so these higher value crops can be much more lucrative than planting seasonals. That's the entire point. Of course, doing so requires you have to be more patient and typically better capitalized as well, because it does take a rather significant investment to be able to effectively put those higher value fruit trees and things like that into the ground. But again, for well capitalized investors who have that kind of patient money, the longer term returns can really be staggering. We're talking on an unleveraged basis, getting 35, 40, 50% cash flow if you buy in the right locations. Now, of course, again, where you're at, you mentioned this. In California, of course, farmland prices in California are basically hovering near all-time highs. And so it's very hard to generate maximal returns if you're buying essentially at the top of a market. It doesn't really make any sense. And so, with my experience having traveled all over the world, as I've gone over the world, I can look and see different places that have similar climatic conditions, similar soil quality, strong water profiles, and be able to make a decision about where the maximum return is. So that's one of the reasons why I've settled on Chile. But there are a lot of actually very interesting places in the world to do this sort of thing.
And now, I hope all of you are hearing what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that there are many ways to develop an asset that allows you to then produce cash flow. I mean, some people do it with books, and we call them authors. It takes an amount of time up front to invest to actually create that book, and then they get to sell it over and over and over again for their own purposes. You guys know that we've built and we rather rebuild existing U.S. real estate when it comes to commercial and residential assets with apartments, etc. And some of you have taken advantage even of our turnkey system. Again, the same thing. Instead of, but those would be, in this case, this would be the corn, especially the turnkey system is kind of like corn. The apartments and commercial buildings in our resort is definitely more like the higher value crops that we have to wait for to produce the income. And I'm loving the similarities between, how you go out there and, execute your strategy. And then, yes, I love the fact that you bring up the concept of patient money because that's not always the key when it comes to, someone looking for a return. We want it darn near immediately, if not sooner. But learning that skill set of patience is completely necessary. Now, switching subjects a little bit, I've got to ask just some questions when it comes to, business in general. Having grown up in a military family, I have there's a special place in my heart for anyone who A, was previously in the military, and then B, finds a way to put themselves in business, and you've done that. And so that is, in my opinion, awesome, because you were fighting for the very freedom that you now get to take advantage of in its full measure. And you, my friend, as many have said, they call you the freest man in the world and permanent world traveler and all these other things, and I love it. So you're doing some amazing things. You're teaching others to be ready, though, for anything, and how we need to be self-reliant. How does that apply in, say, business as well?
Well, nobody's going to give it to you, and I think you're obviously probably the best example of just about anybody that I know. I mean, nobody's going to give it to you. At the end of the day, your successes and failures really all come down to you, and how much you're willing to go out there and learn what you need to learn and execute. And I think that's really ultimately it. And I think that's really the great thing about business and going out there on your own, is because it ultimately does make you responsible for everything that happens or fails to happen in your life. And I think, in a lot of other situations, we can kind of coast by. But, when you're out there and essentially whether or not you make it or don't make it, really all comes down to you. You have nobody else to blame but yourself, or pat yourself on the back for a job well done. I think that's a really exciting thing. Definitely nobody's going to give it to you. And I know you've learned that, and I certainly have as well.
You mean you don't just wake up one morning and say, here's a neat little business all wrapped in the box ready to go for you? That didn't happen?
Yeah, right. And I think that's the thing too, is that I mean, you kind of touched on it before. In a way, it's almost like we really live in an instant gratification society. The speed of everything moves so quickly, and we're accustomed to being able to click here and get this, and to hit this button and get that, and everything just sort of happens so quickly. We're used to just being able to kind of type in a web search and have Google deliver all the answers for us on a neatly organized little platter, and it just doesn't really work that way. In many cases, it requires actually getting out there and taking some falls and figuring it out. But that's it's really the fun and the excitement is in the journey and not the destination.
You do realize you just said, hey everybody, I need you to go fail, and that's where the fun and excitement is.
Well, maybe so. It's maybe it's easier to look back at all the failures. I know that I've had so many failures. I mean, we could have we could probably be here for the rest of the day talking about all the different failures that I've had. But I think I wouldn't be in this position because I feel like I wouldn't have learned so much, and that's really where I've learned so much to be able to to execute the things that I'm doing now is from failure. I think it's one of the best teachers out there.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love winning. Winning is fun. I might even be addicted to it in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure. However, I've learned more when things haven't gone the way that I expected than when they do go the way that I expect. So I'm kind of curious, if you had to if you had a top 10, Simon's top 10 most grandiose failures, which one or ones would you put at the top? Or more importantly than that, more important than what happened or what didn't happen, what did you learn?
Oh, wow. I wouldn't even know where I'd start to get to the top. The things that I've learned, I guess the nice thing is that I've learned a different lesson every time. So I don't think I've committed the same mistake twice.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good thing, right? And some of the lessons have been very costly. I got involved in a real estate deal overseas. I'd raised some external capital from some other investors, and it didn't go very well for a lot of different reasons that I was able to kind of diagnose later. One of which I was a bit naive and assumed that I would just be able to operate in the way that I was accustomed to operating, instead of every time you go and try and get a permit, having to bring a suitcase full of cash to somebody and line somebody's pockets. And that's just not something that I had anticipated, with numerous delays and all those sorts of things, as I wasn't at that point in my life. I was very young, in my early 20s, and just wasn't really accustomed to to the ways of the world back then.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, the deal ended up going south, but I felt personally responsible for it, and actually ended up stepping up and pulling the money out of my own pocket and making the rest of the investors whole in the deal, and ended up taking the loss myself, and that was one that hurt a lot. But I felt it was the right thing to do, and I ended up learning, quite a bit about, how the world works, and it cost me quite a bit, but the education, I think, was well worth it looking back.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that I, I think we all learn that in some way, shape, or form is that, when we're entrepreneurs, we're I think by nature on the more positive side of life, and we tend to trust and believe that everyone's going to do things the way we would do them. And I can concur with you on having made that exact same error, and just going, wow, what I also find interesting is that we both decided to solve it the exact same way. So that is definitely interesting, because I too felt that same responsibility. But at the end of the day, it's like you said earlier, entrepreneurialism gets to make you responsible for what happens or what doesn't happen. So with that being said, I'm just kind of curious, how do you feel about entrepreneurialism in general, and more importantly, do you think more people should become entrepreneurs? Now, seriously, do you really not know what he's about to say? Anyway, I'll get you back to the interview in just a second. I want to interrupt your Memorial Day just to say a quick thank you to all of those who have ever served in any way inside of military services or paramilitary services, because without you guys, what we do here is not possible. There would be no reason to even think about listening to podcasts, building real estate. We wouldn't have an opportunity of things like wealth without the sacrifice you guys make every day, all the time. So if you're a fireman, policeman, service person in any way, shape, or form, we're talking armed military or otherwise, government service, all those GS levels, etc. I just hope that when you're listening to this message, you feel a heartfelt thank you. If never anyone else says thank you, know that we here say thank you, because without you, there is no us. Now, I will get you back straight to the interview.
Well, I'm very pro entrepreneurship, and one of the reasons why is because I think I come across a lot of people. Well, I'll back up and say one of the things that I spend a lot of time in Chile. I mean, I travel extensively, but I do spend a lot of time here in Chile. And one of the things I really like about Chile is that, particularly compared to the rest of Latin America, it has by far the most exciting entrepreneurial culture. They've really kind of gone out of their way to help inculcate that culture, and they've got a very unique and interesting program here called Startup Chile. And this is essentially a program where aspiring entrepreneurs, people with great ideas, can come and get equity-free grants and things like that, plus work visas and access to investor networks and all sorts of things. And it's been very interesting. It's been very successful program. A lot of hundreds of people have gone through it, and been able to, again, take all this equity-free investment capital, and it makes a big difference to people just starting a business. I've been able to work very closely with a number of participants in the program, and I was just they invited me to come and speak at an event they held. I guess it was just last Friday. And I went out there, and people were asking questions, and one gentleman raised his hand and he said, if I ever had any experience investing in social businesses. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, businesses that are out there to, make an impact on the world, and help make the world a better place. And I said, I think all businesses are social businesses. I think that anybody that starts a company is doing something inherently good for the world and for other people. Because if you start a business and you build a successful business, think about all the great things you're doing. You're providing a valuable product in the world for somebody else. You've got consumers now that are better off because they have your product or service. For example, what you're doing, Jay. You help so many people with what you do, with your products and services that you offer. And even just the stuff that you give away for free is just phenomenal. The book that you put out, that's something that's going to help so many people. And so by doing that now, you've really helped a number of consumers, and you've made the world a better place by doing that. But at the same time, you've also managed to help other people build wealth. You know, when you start a business, you have a successful company, you have employees, and so now you've got people that are out there making a living and improving themselves and learning skills and all these things just because you went out there and started a business. I mean, this is a really impactful thing on the world. And so again, I view any business out there really as a kind of a social business, because every business I think has the potential to vastly improve the lives of all their consumers and their employees and their shareholders, and be able to build wealth for people that come in and invest and so forth. I mean, what a wonderful thing! And how many times? I mean, how many opportunities do you really get to do that? I mean, it's really an incredible thing to be able to go out and positively impact so many people's lives. I think it's a great thing. And so, yeah, I think more people should do it. And obviously that's why we do our entrepreneurship training camps every year. So pleased you're going to be joining us for that this year.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the cat is out of the bag. I'm going to an entrepreneurial training camp with Simon Black. Tell us a little bit about that, since now they know.
Well, so I apologize for the awkward segue, but I did want to bring it up because I think what you're doing is very cool. This is something we do every year. I've been doing it I've lost count now of how many years we've been doing this, but it's something I'm very proud of. I feel like my whole life is about doing really interesting things with really interesting people. And in my life, I can look at some really just amazing and interesting things that I've been able to participate in. But of all those things, this is really my favorite. It really is my favorite. What we do every summer is we get together some of the I gather some of the brightest entrepreneurial minds I know, people that have been out there and they've accomplished great things. Had some falls, had some failures, had a lot of successes, and bring together about 50 students from all over the world and try and cram in about 5 days more than anybody would ever learn in years of university or an MBA course, by helping the students understand, this is literally step by step, the ways that I failed, how I failed, and how, this cost me a lot of time and a lot of money, and I failed. And so you can learn from that. And here's how I succeeded, and you can learn from that. And I did this and I did that, and here are the keys to my success, and here's exactly how I was able to accomplish this, and exactly how I was able to accomplish that, and things that you just, are things that you just wouldn't ever be able to learn from a textbook or a classroom setting. And getting so many different times, so many different types. I've had guys come out who have started, built, and sold for a lot of money, very successful tech companies, brick and mortar type, e-commerce, just about everything, IT companies, real estate as well, anything that you could pretty much imagine. We've had all types, come through our doors, and students from literally all over the world. Last year, we had Mongolia, Zimbabwe, Australia, Indonesia, Colombia, Venezuela, just everywhere you could imagine from all over the world. And of course, from the United States and Canada and all over Western Europe. And so it's one of the most international groups. They all generally tend to be young people, in their 20s, kind of, again, with most of their careers in front of them, full of energy and enthusiasm, and a lot of really amazing ideas. And it's a real honor and privilege to participate in that and be able to do that. And this year we will be joined by none other than Jay Massey, and incredibly pleased that you'll be joining us. I think you have such a great story and so much knowledge, and what a great opportunity for all these young people to be able to learn from what you've done in your life.
I definitely appreciate the opportunity to be there. Clearly, I've not been to Lithuania yet. I'm sure you've been there many times, so that'll be new. I know the last time I went international, I was over in Estonia, sharing some information with them, and those guys have been reporting back how they've been able to, raise capital and get some transactions done, just from the short little time that I was there. And it feels good to hear those things, that there are people out there all across the world who are ready for entrepreneurialism, and they're ready for the concepts, that they're willing to do the implementation that it takes in order to make these things happen. And you, sir, have managed to help and cultivate this culture. I mean, because to some degree, the world is flat, as we've all heard in the books, because the internet connects us all, and this is just one of those events where you get to see some of those. You get to see the true opportunity that a business can create across the world in a very short period of time, and more importantly, the impact that you get to have is amazing. And I know when you told me about it, I was just I don't know if I could say yes faster especially after seeing some of the applications that the participants send in, and I'm just like, man. Thank you for. I'm already grateful for just being asked and being able to be a part of someone else's life in yet another way. So I'm looking forward to it. Kind of curious. Who are some of the other people that you can tell us that are going to be there for those who might be interested as instructors?
The other folks are going to be instructors. We've got this year, I think, more instructors than we've ever had. I've got a friend of mine who's based here in South America. He's Peruvian, and he is an incredibly successsul mining magnate. What he does is essentially very similar, I think, actually, to what you do. You were saying how you go out and in many ways sort of rehabilitate real estate and add value in that way. He'll do the same thing with mines. He'll go out and find inefficiently, poorly run kind of mom and pop mines that don't have the professional management and appropriate controls and things like that, and he'll go in and acquire those with a team of other investors, and then actually improve the operations of the mine and turn it into something that is much more profitable and create value in that way for everybody that's involved. I've got my friend Craig Ballantyne, who runs a couple of actually really phenomenally successful websites. He runs one called Turbulence Training. He's probably one of the top online fitness gurus, and also runs a website called Early to Rise, which is sort of a self-help entrepreneurial type website. It's an excellent site. Another very close friend of mine, who's I would say actually one of the world's foremost internet marketing experts. Another friend of mine from South Africa who is coming in to talk about essentially how he was able to buy a number of businesses with essentially absolutely no money, taking notes from the owners and developing those businesses and improving the cash flows of the business and creating value in those businesses that way. Another friend who's a very successful artist out in California. Just a wide variety of people. This year, and very pleased because we have students, again, same deal, from all over, all walks of life, and try and bring as much variety as possible. And I think your story and your knowledge and skills and experience will fit very well into all of that, and just really pleased that you're joining us.
Oh man, when you keep talking about it, it cannot get here fast enough. I want to get on the plane and sit and just like, wait, are they here yet? Are they here yet? It feels like that Christmas will be coming early for me this year. That's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. So now, you and I also talk about something that I think is in common that everybody should know about. I often, talk about real estate in the sense of, because people ask me, Jay, are you concerned about the U.S. dollar? I'm like, yeah, I'm concerned. That's partly why I buy real estate, so that I have something in case that tends to disappear and go away, et cetera, and I still have a way to trade value for value. And the person who's raising sheep still needs a place to stay and raise their sheep, and in your case, everybody likes to eat, so worst case scenario, you can trade food for something different. I'm just kind of curious about how you feel about some of those things when it comes to the U.S. and understanding how to purpose the real estate either internationally or otherwise, because that's part of the reason we started diversification internationally. It's because we were concerned about these things, and we were like, okay, here's a way to protect ourselves. Would love for you to comment in any direction you'd like on those topics?
Well, again, that's something that I think for a lot of folks is controversial. That doesn't I don't shy away from it. That's more of a caveat to say, if you have sensitive ears, be forewarned. When you start saying things like "I've got concerns about the dollar" and all that, a lot of people think that you're nuts. Because we've all been brought up to believe that, particularly if you're from the United States, that the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. It has the strongest economy. It has the strongest currency, and so on and so forth. But if you actually look at the data, and I'm a very data-driven person, the
Yes,
data
you
actually
are.
is a completely different story, right? I mean, you've seen this. I mean, the data tells you a completely different story, and it's a very important thing, I think, for people who really want to understand the truth to first sort of check their emotions and all those sort of biases that that we ourselves have been inculcated with for our entire lives, and just check all of that and look at, commit to looking at the data. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't feel one way or the other. They're not positive. They're not optimistic. They're not pessimistic. They just are. They're just truth. And the truth of the matter is that the U.S. economy, the U.S. government, the U.S. banking system, the U.S. central banking system, the currency, all these things are in very, very hot water. And it gets worse. I'm not going to say by the day, because things go up and down all the time, but the general trend, weeks and months on end, certainly every month, it continues to get worse and worse and worse. So I can just give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. People talk a lot about the debt in the United States, for example. And debt's an interesting thing for real estate investors. And I know you're no fan of the banking system and haven't really used bank debt, but
Right.
just as an example, we'll say, let's say I told you that I had a mortgage for my total sort of I had $10 million in mortgages, right? Now, for most people, they'd say, "Oh my God, that's a lot of money in mortgage. You're in debt up to your eyeballs." But a savvy real estate investor would say, "Well, how much? What are the assets worth?"
Right.
Because if you have $10 million in mortgage loans, that might sound bad, but if you have $50 million in sort of value on the land or the homes, the apartments, whatever it is that you own, if the assets are worth 50 million and you only have 10 million in mortgages, you're doing pretty well for yourself. You're doing really well for yourself.
Right.
But if, on the other hand, you have $10 million in loans and the assets are only worth $5 million, then you're upside down. And that's a bad situation to be in. And the U.S. government is in a position where they look at their, the sort of the official public debt is about $17.5 trillion right now. That's a massive number. But again, it's important to look at it in context. What are the assets worth? And this, nobody has to take my word for it or anybody else's. They can take the U.S. government's own word for it, because every year the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, this is an agency of the United States government. This is sort of like their own auditing firm. The GAO puts out its own figures. They basically put out financial statements for the U.S. government. And the U.S. government's own financial statements essentially add up all the assets. So the highway system, the gold in Fort Knox, and every tank and every aircraft carrier and all these sorts of things that the United States government has, and as the cash assets, everything that it's got, all the assets that the U.S. government has. And then from that, it subtracts all the liabilities, not just the official public debt, $17.5 trillion, but there's other debts as well. There's the pension system and military retirement, all these different things that are liabilities. And so, like anything, there's assets and liabilities. Now, when they subtract the liabilities from the assets, you end up with a net worth. In the same way, if you have 50 million in assets and 10 million in liabilities, the net worth is $40 million. You're doing very well. In the case of the U.S. government, when they subtract the two, the net worth of the U.S. government is minus $16.9 trillion, which is well over 100% of GDP. That is a completely untenable, unsustainable situation. And that word is actually used a lot, unsustainable. And so we kind of walk that dog a little bit further and say, okay, well, let's sort of look at the situation right now. Last year, the U.S. government took in, and again, this isn't Simon Black, wild conjecture. This is publicly available data, and the publicly available data tells us that the U.S. government took in $2.6 trillion in tax revenue last year. They spent $2.5 trillion just to pay interest on the debt, Social Security, and Medicare. That's it. Before they wrote a check for the military, for the light bill at the White House, for the national parks, for the IRS, for Homeland Security, for any of these things that we think of as government, they had pretty much burned through almost all of their entire tax revenue just for the stuff that they're required by law to pay, Social Security, Medicare, and of course, interest on the debt. And the astounding thing is that's with interest rates being at all-time lows. Anybody in real estate knows this very well. Interest rates are at all-time lows right now. We've never seen in the history of the United States interest rates this low before. And so, with interest rates at all-time lows and the U.S. government being able to borrow at practically nothing, and they're still blowing through almost the entirety of their tax revenue just to pay interest, and of course the things that they're required by law, Medicare and Social Security, that's a pretty bad situation. And then you consider that the debt increases every month, every year. So that means the amount of interest they're going to have to pay next year is going to be even greater. And the amount of people who are collecting retirement, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, that goes up every day. Thousands of people a day start collecting Social Security and Medicare. And so you reach a certain point where literally every single penny of tax revenue will be insufficient to cover just interest expense and Social Security and Medicare. They spend more on interest than they do on the military. So, these are the numbers. This is the truth of the situation. It's not some crazy conspiracy theory. This is just the numbers. This is what the truth is. And I would encourage anybody who really wants to understand, you can look at this stuff yourself. I would encourage you to go to the Bureau of Public Debt. This is a division of the Department of Treasury. You can see they have a nice little thing that says debt to the penny. I would encourage you to just do a Google search for the U.S. government financial statements, and you'll find a link to the Government Accountability Office and read those. Look at the GAO website and find the financial statements of the United States government, and you'll see this all for yourself. This is the U.S. government's own admission of its financial condition.
Wow. So,
kind of a downer, huh?
No, absolutely not. It just says it just says that when you look at numbers, you have to learn how to interpret them and make salient decisions, and then you're only confirming part of our decision, like I said, to diversify outside of the U.S. Not that we're down and thinking the U.S. is going to just crumble and forget. There'll be a solution. I don't know what it is, but at the same time, the point becomes, what can we do about it as entrepreneurs? So let me ask you that, as an entrepreneur facing that type of information, what do you say that we could do about that?
Well, that's what I think the greatest thing about it is because as entrepreneurs, what you're fundamentally doing is solving problems. This is what any entrepreneur does. This is a huge thing that you do. You solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. Somebody says, I've got money, but not a lot of time to invest in real estate. Well, you can solve that problem for them. I've got not necessarily a lot of cash, but a lot of time, but not enough knowledge. You can solve that problem for them as well. You solve so many problems for people. And this is what really fundamentally any entrepreneur does. And I think that as entrepreneurs, to look at this and say, look, the truth is not terribly comfortable. However, in any situation where there's problems, that creates a lot of opportunity for people to create solutions. And I think as entrepreneurs, there are problems to solve, and we can, and this is a huge problem that needs solving. And I think ultimately this is something that gets solved. And I guess to go back to the original question, this is why I think it's so important to develop those skills, to be able to rely on yourself, because the answers are not coming from government. Government is the institution that essentially creates a lot of these problems. They're the ones that are spending the money and passing the laws and so forth. Ultimately, the solutions are going to come from within. They're going to come from ourselves. They're going to come from each and every one of us, all of your listeners, you and I, everybody. It's ultimately up to us. And that's why I think those skills to be able to develop a means of self-reliance, to say, okay, how can I generate income on my own? How can I go out there and identify a situation where I can solve a problem. And in solving a problem, I can add value to somebody else's life, as well as build wealth for my employees, build wealth for myself, take care of my family. Where are those problems that I can solve? And I think there's going to be more and more and more of those problems coming as this situation sort of continues along the same trend. So ultimately, I'm very optimistic about all of this. I don't think this is a bad news story. I think this is a story of hope and optimism ultimately.
Agreed, 100%. And with that being said, that's why I've always suggested that don't look for properties, don't look for someone who has a property sale, don't look for someone who could be your private lender. Look for a problem to solve, and those other pieces will find you. You will get that. It all comes together in very serious ways. And more importantly, I believe that the economy will be healed one entrepreneur at a time. And that probably means you listening to us right now. So, Simon, just kind of curious, what is, the best way for us to find more of you? If for those that are right now, they're intrigued, they want to know more, they want to take on the challenge that you've been giving of becoming self-reliant, becoming that entrepreneur. What would you say is their next best step?
Well, if somebody wants to learn a bit more about the things that I've been talking about, our website is sovereignman.com. We talk about this stuff routinely, and there's a lot of really great resources and educational materials on the site. So I would definitely invite anybody to check that out. The other thing, again, we've alluded to this, the entrepreneurship camp that I sponsor every year. There's more information on that at sovereignacademy.org. And people can read a little bit more about that. Most of those links, basically most of the things that I'm involved in are all on our main website, sovereignman.com, so people can check that out and get links to everything else, to the camp, to the to the fund and everything else. That's all out on sovereignman.com.
Excellent. And I'm told you have a podcast too?
I do. There are some would be some probably very interesting podcasts for people if they want to check out, again, get a lot more information on some of the things that I've been talking about. If people are still, kind of trying to clear their heads and say, did I just hear him say what I said? If you want to go down that rabbit hole a little bit more and really get spooked by, truth can, it's true. I mean, the truth will set you free, but it can be a very scary thing. If you want to get more information, and more of that data, we have a lot of, Jay, of course, you've seen it. There was some very, data-driven presentations, and a lot of those are in our podcast. So you can get that right off of the same website at sovereignman.com.
Excellent. Yes, I do remember seeing it. I was waiting for either a punchline, a joke, or something to go positive, and you had to wait to the very, very end. So glad that I stuck it out, though. But nonetheless, don't hide from the truth. Confront it. It'll give you the power to decide and act and go out there and get something new done. Just out of curiosity, this is probably the last question, but what on earth would you say to that person who maybe this is the first time they've listened to this show, first time they're listening to you, but they're thinking about going out there to begin creating cash flow in some way, shape, or form? What would you say to that particular individual who's doubting and wondering, should they or shouldn't they, etc.?
Oh, I would say 100% go and do it. And how to get started is this. This is what I tell people, every year at our camps. I'd say, look, you've learned all these things from all these very accomplished people, and maybe you've got a great idea. Maybe you're not sure. Maybe you don't have the confidence yet. If nothing else, do this. Find somebody who has a lifestyle, has some successes and so forth that you aspire to achieve, that you aspire to be like, that you aspire to at least try and emulate. Make yourself indispensable to that person and learn as much as you can from that person, because knowledge is ultimately going to be the thing that helps people achieve everything that they wanted to achieve. Everything is really inside of our brains. That's the primary tool that we as human beings have, and it is the greatest tool in the universe. But you have to cultivate it, and doing so, you can learn, you can study, and you can do all those things, and that's very important to have a baseline, knowledge. But learning from an individual, I think, is the most powerful way to do that. So find somebody who has the skills that you want to acquire, and learn as much as you possibly can from that person.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you here today, and I definitely thank you for the time that you have chosen to invest here with us. We hope that you have earned a return, sir, for the investment that you made. I know that many of us listening have probably had our minds shaken up a little bit, but most importantly, we now know that it's time to go out there and take some action. So everybody, you know what you need to do. It's time to move at the speed of instruction. It's time to take action. Go over to sovereignman.com. Go over to the sovereignacademy.com. Find out, do something. Don't just point fingers saying somebody should take care of it. You are that somebody. And what I'm excited about is that now you have the opportunity to go out there and become the good that you want to see in the world. I have had a great time with you today, Simon. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate the info. Thanks.
All right, guys, I will talk to you until next time.
Thank you for investing your time with Jay Massey and the Cash Flow Diary. When you have a moment, please visit iTunes and leave a positive comment about the show. And go now to our website, cashflowdiary.com, to take advantage of our free business building course, Cash Flow Foundation. Gain the knowledge, understanding, and skill that will teach you how to never need a job again. Until next time.